13, lights out. They do not play as a team around them.
This episode of the Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. If I have some comments that I believe I need to catch up on, then I'll obviously do so as soon as I can. Talking of comments, there was a viewer put a comment on the last Lindors episode of the show that I did, and they said they managed to purchase a tasting set with the same samples in that I reviewed, and so they tasted along with me while watching the episode. So if any of you guys do that, I mean, I know it's not always possible. Some of the samples that I use are independent bottlings, so they might not be available in your locale. They might be old, so that they're no longer available anywhere really. But if you do, that would be really cool to know, and whether you agree or disagree with my assessment, that would be good. So anyway, this week's episode of the show, I thought it was about time to do an episode of the show on everybody's favourite Islay distillery. I think this is only the fourth episode of the show on Laphroaig that I've ever done over the last 10 years or so, but I suppose there's probably more distilleries I haven't reviewed than those I have, I guess. But anyway, Laphroaig is quite an intriguing distillery insofar that it's, I mean, obviously peated malts and Marmite, but Laphroaig seems to be more Marmite than Marmite, if you see what I mean. The amount of people that say, oh, I really love my peated malts, but I can't get on with Laphroaig. I can't be dealing with all that medicinal iodine and so on and so forth, and seaweed. So even amongst sort of like peat freaks, it is quite a divisive distillery, and I mean, I love it. I mean, it's a really, really unusual distillery, and it's always fun to do an episode of the show on them. And as you can see, I've picked. I was kindly given. I think it was for Christmas. I think a family member gave me a little tasting pack of Laphroaig. That's another weird thing. The amount of people that say, "Well, we can't buy you whiskey because you'll be so disappointed if we get it wrong." And I say, "Well, you're not going to get it wrong. I just love tasting whiskey, full stop. Don't care what it is, I love to taste it, and so you can't buy me a right or a wrong whiskey, just in case you were thinking of buying me a present." But no hints there. But anyway, so yes, I thought it'd be nice to do an episode on Laphroaig. So I've got 3 distillery bottlings and 3 fairly old independent bottlings. Now, kind of run with me on this. Now, the reason I haven't opened this bottle, if you see, this was an unopened sample bottle from Duncan Taylor back in 2010. Now, the reason I haven't opened it is because look at how much it's lost. This was full. So in 10 years, the evaporation is about a third, or possibly a quarter, possibly. Now, interestingly, I was reading a review on Malt Review, and the chap had reviewed the Laphroaig quarter cask in the 10-year-old, and he'd written his tasting note when he'd opened the bottle. He then left the bottles for about a year, and then rewrote tasting notes when they were in their last quarter, and wanted to see how they would differ. And as we all know, over time, some bottles of whiskey do change quite dramatically, some for the better, some for the worse. And the theory that he put forward for why this is that not the fact due to oxidation and sort of the interaction of the air and the spirit. He claimed it was because of evaporation of alcohol. Well, I suppose that's a good theory. He said, obviously alcohol evaporates at a lower temperature than water, so you lose alcohol, which is why your whiskies often taste a bit flat and a bit manky, because they're now underpowered. Certainly, if it's 40-odd%, it may well have dropped a few percent. Now, if he'd have backed this up with a bit of science and said, well, look, I had a hydrometer and I took the alcohol content at both points, then he could say, look, yeah, definitely 100% correct. This is what happens. But so as it is, it's just an interesting theory, and he could be right, could be wrong. But I thought it was an interesting theory nevertheless. So yeah, off on a little bit of a tangent there, I suppose. But anyway, so I don't think there's really a great deal else to say apart from let's take a look at today's one. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off with the quarter cask. So this is obviously young Laphroaig with aged in quarter size casks to get more oak character into the young spirit. Now, is that a problem? Well, we'll obviously find out. Bottled at 46%. We're going to look at the ubiquitous 10-year-old, which is available practically everywhere. Unfortunately, bottled at 40% and filtered. I mean, one thing that I think that the owners of Laphroaig could do is basically up the ABV of that and stop filtering it. But of course they're not going to, because the 10-year-old has got to be hit a certain price point. It always seems to be discounted. It's always in sort of supermarkets and stuff like that, and it has to be relatively inexpensive in roughly, so I guess, like I say, so you up the ABV 6%, and that puts quite a considerable amount of cost onto the base of the product. So anyway, then we're going to look at the first of three independent bottlings. Like I said, this is a Duncan Taylor Rare Old Laphroaig, 12-year-old from 1997. July of 1997. It was bottled in May of 2010, so like I said, it's been sat around for the last 12 years, and so lost quite a fair amount. I mean, obviously whisky bottles won't lose quite so much because they're corked. I mean, obviously sample bottles have no cork, so it's not particularly airtight at all. Anyway, so this is a single bourbon hoggy, 56441, bottled at 54.8%. Next bottling is an AD Rattray individual cask bottling. It's a 13-year-old, distilled in 1998, bottled in 2012, and it's a single bourbon cask, again 10475, bottled at 59%. Now, I mean, this kind of goes back to a time when Laphroaig was pretty much a staple of most independent bottling companies. I mean, but since 2000, probably 2012, 13, so we're looking at at last 8 years, it's practically dropped off everybody's lists. I mean, obviously it's because the distillery no longer sells to the independents, and when an independent bottling of Laphroaig does indeed crop up, it's stupid money. It's ridiculously expensive. But back in the day, it was all right, a little bit more expensive than some, but it was still not the price it was is today. Anyway, on to the second AD Rattray individual cask bottlings. This is a 1990 distillation, March of 1990, bottled in June of 2009, bourbon cask 2239, and making it a 19-year-old, bottled at 56%. Now, I have put my nose in these so that the samples are still alive and kicking. They're not completely gone over the hill. Although I did have a selection of 6 independent bottlings, and 1 or 2 of them had not survived the time, shall we say. And the final bottling is back to the distillery, and this is the Lore, bottled at 48%, apparently created by John Campbell, and it's a vatting of spirit aged between 7 and 21 years old, aged in a combination of obviously first fill sherry, quarter casks, and apparently reused peated casks. So refill Laphroaig casks. That's another interesting thing. I remember Blackadder doing some bottlings many years ago, where they actually sort of stated what the finishing cask, or what distillery the finishing cask came from. So there was a number that had sort of aged in blah blah blah, finished in X Glen Grant sherry butt, for want of a or something like that, or refilled sherry hogshead from Aberlour or something like that. And so yeah, it's quite interesting that you just more often than not they're sort of like aged in refill bourbon. Okay, well, did they come from somewhere else? Is it just refilled because you've used the cask yourself a couple of times? Interesting thought there, which just popped into my head just now. Anyway, enough of that. Let's taste some whiskey, shall we? Right, okay, so let's see what the quarter cask gives us. So you can probably just make out the colour, quite a lot of colour. So one assumes these quarters, probably a combination, I imagine, of first fill quarters and refill quarters, I guess, because it's got a lovely intensity. There is quite a lot of oak character. It's got that sort of oily marzipan, but it's got that lovely, fresh, young Laphroaig character. Quite herbal, menthol, not getting so much iodine or sort of medicinal notes, it's more mentholated. Not getting a huge amount of vanilla either. It's the sort of the oak is more kind of gritty and a little bit tannic. There is some elements of vanillins. So it is offering a sort of a soft edge to the young Laphroaig. That's actually really quite complex. And like I said, quarter casks do work. They do work well, as long as your spirit, I guess, is capable of being bottled at a relatively young age. And obviously Laphroaig is. I mean, we'll sort of see how the sort of 10-year-old sort of stacks up against this, and how much, you know, more mature character that shows over this. But yeah, if you want a nice dollop of sort of, you know, mentholated herbal peat, it's nice. Let's see what passes out. Herbal, salty, slightly medicinal to kick off with. Oak does move in, a little bit more noticeable vanilla, but that vanilla is very fleeting, and then in comes the tar, the rubber, the creosote, brine, menthol, and then it finishes up with some ash, tannins, almost sort of like coffee note possibly, smoke, grit. Yeah, that's a lovely bottling. Really very impressive. It has a lot of complexity, and just goes to show that how using quarter size casks can be really effective. And again, it's all about balancing them out, I think. So obviously they have used some, I would imagine, a small fraction that were either sort of first fill or possibly even virgin. Probably maybe not any virgin ones, probably first fills, and then a combination of refill quarters to sort of, like, you know, make sure it isn't overly oaky and you still get plenty of spirit, but you do get some oak character. So well, they've been bottling this for long enough, so you know, they should be getting it right, shouldn't they? So yeah, great starter, I think. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 10-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? A lot softer, a lot less intense, slightly astringent, a little bit of rubber, a little bit of medicinal notes. It's pleasant, it's soft, it's smoky, it's kind of got some fish oil. I mean, it's kind of, it is a classic nose at the end of the day, it has to be saying. It's not got the intensity, obviously, of the quarter cask, because the spirit is a bit older. It's also 40% as opposed to being 46%, and the filtration has obviously again removed some complexity, so it doesn't quite have the sort of fireworks, should we say, of the quarter cask, but you know, it's still not a bad nose at all, and I guess it's all kind of boils down to how much you pay for it, really. If you can pick it up relatively inexpensively, then fine, but I wouldn't be paying sort of you know, 50 odd quid for it, shall we say. Sure, pass right. Soft, briny, more medicinal in actual fact. Maybe these medicinal characters come out with age a bit more, possibly. Maybe younger, it's more mentholated and then becomes more medicinal with time. maybe it's just the casks. There's a little bit of iodine. It's got a softness. There's some tar, some peat smoke. Not a great deal of oak character. It's all very subtle oak. Just a sort of an intimation really of wood. Maybe a little bit of gritty tannin just right on the finish. It's okay. It's pleasant. It's not a bad whiskey. It's certainly, when you taste the two side by side, the quarter cask kind of has so much more intensity and complexity. And maybe you could argue the 10-year-old's a little bit more laid back, a little bit more sort of like, you know, kind of a little bit more woodier, but simpler and softer. Again, like I said, I think a lot of it is pretty much down to the ABV and the filtration. But so what I'm trying to say is it could be so much more interesting without the filtration and the higher ABV, but of course it ain't going to happen. So it's like, well, you know, horses for courses, isn't it? If you want the sort of the intensity, you buy the quart cask. If you're happy with sort of like, you know, the 10-year-old, then you buy the 10-year-old, I suppose. So, but either way, that's it. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Duncan Taylor Laphroaig. Obviously, as I've just opened this, I don't know if, you know, whether the sample is actually in any fit, shape or form. But anyway, we'll find out, won't we? Yeah, it's okay. It's got a lot of maturity. Really smells a lot more mature than 12 years old, it has to be said. It's actually got quite a lot of oak character, and that lovely old sawdusty American oak. Quite fruity as well, rich. I'm getting sort of apricot, tangerine, a little bit of smoke, not a huge amount of medicinal notes, not a lot of salt either. I'm guessing that this cask probably spent more years on the mainland than it did on Islay, shall we say. And that kind of throws up a whole new kind of conversation about, you know, the saltiness, the brininess, whether casks should be left on Islay or whether it is okay to ship them onto the mainland. That's a lovely nose. That's quite a rich and fruity, not a term you would tend to use very often with Laphroaig, but it is a lovely fruity Laphroaig, and it smells considerably older now. Obviously, I'd be amazed if there's any of this still on the open market, but if there is, getting a little bit more medicinal notes coming through now, a little bit of tar. I think it's just taking a bit of time. I think it just needs to sit in the glass for the more sort of medicinal notes to come through, but that's stunningly good. That really is amazingly good, Laphroaig. Let's see what the pass on. Full, rich, rounded, again really fruity by Laphroaig standards. Apricot, tangerine, orange. Peat builds wonderfully. It's a little bit more saline than the nose would suggest, and that is building, and it's getting more medicinal, it's getting more astringent as it moves towards the finish, and it's still going. My mouth is now starting to water quite amazingly, and it's not hot at all. Yes, it's quite spicy. Yes, you do notice the alcohol, but wow, that's kind of building that lovely ashy, peaty kind of intensity. A little bit medicinal as well, some rubber and creosote tar. Tar, definite tar on the aftertaste. Oh, stunning cask, it has to be said. Don't think it needs any water. I hope putting a little drop of water isn't going to absolutely trash this, because I've left a bit in it for me to taste as I'm editing the video. So let's see. Slightly more herbal now, actually, with a little drop of water. It's kind of definitely getting bog myrtle and almost some heathery notes as well. More phenolic as well. I'm getting more tar, more tarry peat sort of. Yeah, that's taken water pretty well, and this sample is, you know, considering, like I said, 12 years this has been sat in the sample bottle, it's held up amazingly well. Big thank you to Duncan Taylor, that's all I can say. if they ever bottled a Laphroaig now, would I ever get a sample of it? No, don't think so. And you're looking at least 3 figures, I would have thought, for a 12-year-old cask strength bottling. But anyway, let's see what the price right now. Peat has dropped off a little bit. It's still a bit medicinal on the finish. Certainly getting more of that old sawdusty American oak. It really has got, it feels so much older than 12 years old. It's incredible. I mean, I can see why it was bottled, because it is just absolutely gorgeous. It's questionable as whether that would have actually carried on aging, because it does taste so old. So maybe, you know, if they'd have left it for, let's say, another 5 or 6 years, wonder whether it would have been in quite such a great place. But even so, oh, stunning, stunning. Right, okay, so let's move on. So this is an additional year older. This is a 13-year-old 80 Rattray bottling. Again, bourbon. Let's see what those goes. Again, lovely density, rich, velvety apricot, very gentle peat, a little bit of salt. There's a bit of a prickle from the alcohol. I mean, this is 59%, but I'll tell you what. I mean, it's pretty well integrated. I mean, it's just a little prickle. It's not kind of being too masking. Quite herbal, bog myrtle again. And that sort of almost kind of nettly leafiness, shall we say. A little bit medicinal. You know, it's not as medicinal as some Laphroaigs, it has to be said. I mean, again, beautiful complexity. Lovely coastal astringency. Oh, getting a bit of manure now, a bit of farmyards. Oh, I like this. This is a great nose. This is one of those lovely noses that just keeps evolving and changing in the glass. Let's see what the pal's like. Oh yes, and you can tell that's 59%. But even so, it's not a sort of throat ripper. It is quite masked, but wow, has that got some peat. I mean, that's dry peat, earthy, dusty peat, a little bit of medicinal peat, some tar, astringent coastal saltiness. I mean, oh, wow, what a palate. I mean, and considering it's quite masked, it's actually quite long as well. Contradiction in terms there, I guess, but lovely, intense, peaty character, just stunning. I mean, just goes to show that, you know, the distillery is a quality distillery. But, you know, have you ever tasted a bad Laphroaig? Well, yes, I have tasted a bad Laphroaig. A few, it has to be said, one was a distillery bottling. I forget which one it was now, but yeah, there have been some sort of ropey bottlings. But I can tell you what, 9 times out of 10, you know, it's a banker, as they say. Wow, that's changed quite dramatically. Really oily now. The peat has practically vanished, and I'm getting sort of oily, sort of vanilla and oily apricot. There's possibly a little bit of a breakdown now, I guess, as the sample is possibly just not dealing with the water as well as I was expecting. But it's still wonderfully fruity. It is. Let's see what passes on that. Quite citric now, in actual fact, but not sort of a sort of acetic citric. If you follow me, it's still quite fleshy, quite fruity, quite apricotty, and fleshy, with this sort of citric note kind of running through it. There's a little bit of lemon. Again, the peat is very much diminished. It's nowhere near as peated now. It's more of an echo. There's a little bit of vanilla, oh yeah, almost some spicy notes as well. Spicy wood notes, I think. It's possible that the sample has decayed a little bit, over time, and thus hasn't taken the water quite so well as it may well have done when it was, you know, first bottled. But even so, without any water at all, I mean, that was a bloody good cask. That's all I can say. Right, okay, so let's move on to the second of the two AD Rattray bottlings. So this is the 19-year-old, distilled in 1990. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end. Oh, that's a gorgeous nose. Oily, coastally, quite fishy, with menthol, bog myrtle, peat, rubber. I mean, it just goes to show that, you know, it's not just a one-dimensional peat monster. Laphroaig, you know, as we can see so far, has so many facets to its character. Some of which obviously you don't see in the distillery releases, and so you have to pick up an independent bottling if you can find one, that is. It's got a lovely kind of peat kind of, well, I use the term peat briquettes. It kind of feels like compacted sort of youthful peat, if you see what I mean. Although peat isn't youthful, I mean, that's a completely stupid thing to say, really, isn't it? It's thousands of years old, so how can it be youthful? But you know what I mean. It's a rawness to it, rather than a smokiness, shall we say. So it's almost like smelling the sort of like the raw briquette, shall we say. Nice and citric as well. So we'll pass on. Really sooty, oily, sooty, slightly medicinal, a little bit of herbal menthol notes, tobacco leaf, really sooty peat, quite drying, a little bit masked. It's kind of not so, the alcohol isn't so obvious, and then you suddenly go, not getting a great deal on the finish now. I mean, 56%, it's punching possibly a bit above its weight. It's got quite a almost grassy kind of aftertaste. Again, the citrus theme is kind of running through there, the smokiness. Let's put a little drop of water with it. I will attempt not to drown it, as there's not an awful lot left there. That's really brought out that nettly note. It almost kind of reminds me of Sauvignon Blanc, white fruits, you know, that kind of nettly Sauvignon kind of note. Quite grassy as well. Underneath there's the oiliness, the rubber, the peat. I mean, yeah, that's quite, well, I wouldn't say dramatically changed, because I mean it was quite leafy and herbal to kind of start off with, but obviously the water has just kind of emphasised that leafy herbal character. See what pass on. Palate is sweeter in actual fact. It's like granulated sugar now, but not sort of uber sweet. I mean, it's still got that lovely citric, salty, sort of offsetting kind of note, but it's got, yeah, almost like a sugariness to it, and I don't think that's unpleasant. Crumbly peat, again, it's got that kind of raw peat as opposed to smoke. I mean, it's almost like tasting the peat. And not that you want to go around eating handfuls of peat, I wouldn't have thought. But anyway, it's, you know, it's got that rawness to it, intensity still. A lot longer now. Oh, stunning. Stunning.
Don't be a fool. Their life is you.
Right, okay, so let's move on to the Lore, the only bottling in today's lineup that actually features any sherry. Oh, I mean, yes, I know, sort of, you know, peat and sherry, great combination, everybody loves it. What was it I was showing at the, oh, yes, it was, yeah, I had the tasting for the company that employs me. Obviously today's episode of the show has no relevance to the company that employs me, even though I said nice things about everything. So yeah, so we had obviously the whiskey tasting evening last week, and I put on one of the Old Goonsies Kalila that I reviewed not so long ago, aged in or finished in Montellado sherry. And yeah, that went down really, really nicely because it was peat and sherry, and obviously everybody likes peat and sherry. But anyway, so let's see. Obviously, there is some maturity happening here. You can smell it, and it's got a lovely density, ashy, rich, dark peat. Dark peat? Can you have dark peat? I mean, it smells quite dark. You know, it's not kind of light, crumbly kind of peat. It's dark, almost kind of oily. I'm getting pepper as well. Medicinal notes. There's a little medicinal note. There's some smoke. Dark marzipan as well. I mean, this is an intriguing nose. It's a nose that really is one to kind of like look into with when you have some time. It's not a sort of one you go, yeah, okay, that's Laphroaig kind of thing. It's got some dimensions to it, it has to be said. And here we are in the sort of no age statement kind of bracket, and here we've got the master blender has got the palette that he can play with, and you know, so not having an age statement, do I care? No. I do not, because this is stunning. This is just what you want from a no age statement whiskey, the breadth and complexity of being able to play with, you know, mature and younger spirit. I mean, you know, because if you put, you know, 7-year-old on the label, it just does it a complete and utter disservice, because it isn't really. There is just so much going on in this nose. And there's a subtle sherry note, it has to be said, which augments and balances, and you know, I bang on about that enough. Ooh, some lovely fruitiness as well. First distillery bottling where I've got that sort of fruitiness that I found in the independent bottlings. Let's see what it passes on. More sherry on the palate, tarry, raisinated fruit, full, rich, astringent medicinal peat, dusty peat, a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of tannin. Stunning, stunning bottling. Mr. Campbell has done an amazing job with this whiskey, it has to be said. It is multi-dimensional, it has layers, it has complexity. I can pick up the youthful notes, I can pick up the maturity, the sherry, I can get the quarter cask tannins. Obviously it kind of helps that when you sort of, you know, taste the sort of, to a certain extent, the raw materials, I suppose, but it's just stunning whiskey, it has to be said at the end of the day. I mean, like I said, multi-layered, really complex, not filtered, you know. Yes, please. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Right, okay, I know there are, like I said at the beginning of the show, Laphroaig does very much kind of like polarise opinion, even in the peat aficionados camp, and I don't think it's medicinal as some people think. You know, you do need to kind of, I wouldn't say recalibrate your palate, because that's probably being a bit arsey, I suppose, but you kind of like have to sort of go, this is not Ardbeg, it's not Kalila, it's not Octomore, it's not any of the other peated whiskies, it's Laphroaig, and hallelujah, we love individuality at the end of the day. And the quarter cask is certainly a good bottling to go for. You know, I mean, it's more expensive than the 10-year-old, yes, I know, but you get more bang for your buck. It's got wonderful complexity. The use of the quarters just works so nicely. It gives it that gritty tannin, which balances up the relative youthful intensity of Laphroaig. And you know, as we know with peated malts, as long as it's not too kind of fainty and sort of, you know, too young, you just have to love that youthful intensity. The 10-year-old, well, it is what it is at the end of the day. You know, there's no point in going on and on about the fact that it's non-chill filtered and bottled at 40%, you know, because it ain't going to change, all right? It's, so judging it solely on what it actually is, it's not a bad whiskey at all, okay? So personally, I would have the quarter cask over the 10-year-old, but the 10-year-old, if you get it for the right price, is absolutely fine. The Duncan Taylor 12-year-old, that tasted so much more older than 12 years old. It really did have that lovely sort of sawdusty oak. It was really complex, and obviously you probably can't buy that for love nor money these days. And probably the same with the AD Rattray bottlings. The 13-year-old, again, another lovely single cask bottling of Laphroaig. A little bit alcoholic, was 59%, but and maybe didn't take water quite so well, but I think it's possibly more to do with the age of the sample rather than the spirit itself. Whether AD Rattray has any casks of Laphroaig knocking about now, no idea, and if they do, they'll probably be bottled in whatever they call their luxury end range, and it would again be horrendously expensive. But back in the day this would just be in their normal bottling, and just bloody amazingly good at the end of the day. And the 19-year-old, that was just a stunning nose and palate, it has to be said. Wonderfully fruity, and this seems to be the thing about sort of, people don't think of Laphroaig and think fruit. You don't. You just think medicinal and herbal and all that kind of stuff. But Laphroaig does have some lovely fruit, and it really, you have to pick up an individual single cask bottling to find that. And of course, you can't. I know I keep going on and on about it. It's a real shame, but maybe Beam should just sort of like chill out a bit and sell more of their casks off. Why not? Does it really matter at the end of the day? I know some companies kind of have an issue about, having their whiskey bottled by independents. They think it's sort of some kind of denigrates their whiskey or something like that, but it doesn't. It just shows a different side to the distillery. And the Lore, well, yes, the Lore is expensive. I forget what it retails for. But it's a damn sight cheaper than buying a 21 or a 25-year-old, if you can find them. Have a look at the prices on the Whisky Exchange for sort of 21 and 25-year-old Laphroaig. Silly money, it has to be said. But the Lore, if you want your fix of sort of maturity and a little bit of sherry and complexity and layers and depth and quality and character and yada yada yada, buy it. Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that if you pick up a bottling of Laphroaig, doesn't matter what it is, an independent or distillery bottling, you're going to be, you're not going to find a bad one, I can tell you that. Well, if you do, you're very unlucky. They do occasionally happen, but more often than not, Laphroaig is a lovely whiskey. So, that's this week's episode of The Show in the Bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. You can pick up the distillery bottlings and sort of taste along if you like, and hopefully you will do, and maybe you'll come up with the same conclusions I do. But anyway, aside from that, if you love your peated malts and you love a bit of medicinal note, but not that much in actual fact, get a Laphroaig. Anyway, good dramming, good afternoon.